is Civil War mini lesson number 1. And today, coming at you straight from my social studies class, it's me, Mr. Grote. That's right. You get me again. All right, we're going to talk about today the Union versus the Confederacy. The Union is symbolic for the name of the northern states during the Civil War and before it. The Confederacy in this lesson is going to stand for any state that is part of the southern, what they call the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. Okay, so we're going to go over some basics and vocabulary here today. First thing we're going to start off with is the North and South. Like, what was the difference between the two of them? The main differences is this. The North was like, look, we're going to use the economy part of our nation, and why do we need slaves? What's the whole point of it? We don't need slavery. The North was totally against slavery. They didn't need it. Not every northern person was against slavery, and those people that were against the war were called copperheads. Okay, so in the North, they were all about industrialization, and their whole thing was right here. Hey man, why don't you guys get with the times? I mean, your way of thinking is like antique-ish, and machines can do in half the time, the machines can do double, triple, or more than 10 times the work a slave can. So why? And I don't know, the fact that slavery is wrong and inhumane, why would you have a slave? So the other part of this is the South, and they were totally against the slave states, or they were totally against the slave-free states. So with the Southern economy, they were all about agriculture. We're talking like farming. We're talking planting your crops, plowing the dirt, that type of stuff. Rice, tobacco, grains, wheat fields, all that stuff. And their whole claim to this argument is this. They're like, look, and it's a pretty legitimate argument, if you ask me. So I'm not saying I'm siding with them, but I get like why you couldn't just end slavery and be like, no, we're done. So here's their claim. If you take away our slaves, hey, dude, it's going to cripple our economy, and the tobacco and rice fields, they're just going to all dry up. Who's going to be out there to do that, right? The cotton gin was the invention of the cotton gin was the main reason why we needed more slaves, because if you produce more material, you're going to need more slaves to pick that material out of the fields, harvest it, bring it to the factories, and then produce it and split the seeds up from the cotton into the cotton gin. So big problem there. This is one of the main reasons why both of these sides clashed when it came to the issue with slavery, is because they said you don't need them anymore, and the South is like, you are going to upset our way of life. It's not fair. And if you free all these slaves, they're just going to fight over jobs, because now they don't have anything to do and they have to make a living, so they're all going to fight when they become free. So really, we're not solving a whole lot. Okay? The next thing here, plain and simple, here is a really good map of like how this happened, right? So the war 1861, right, starts. Here are the states that up here to the north. Anything in blue is going to be part of the Union according to your map key right here. So Oregon, California, Minnesota, Iowa, Kansas, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts. Then you've got Rhode Island and Connecticut and New Jersey. Now, here's the tricky part, okay? Down here, obviously, in the orange dotted circle type thing, is all your Confederate Southern slavery states. Blue, anti-slavery. Red, slavery states. They wanted slavery. These border states here are states that were somewhat indecisive, like they had slavery. Kentucky, Missouri, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. They had slavery, but they were kind of siding with the Union. Kentucky and Maryland and Missouri were kind of forced a little bit, I guess you could say, by martial law and some other things and standing troops to kind of side with the Union. But they eventually did side with the Union, and we call those border states because they're on the border between the Union and the Confederacy. Pretty simple. So southern states secede, so that means they broke away from the United States. 11 broke away total from the Union, and that meant that those red states were no longer part of America. Boom. You broke up with me. Sad. Okay, part of the Civil War here. Uh, Basically, a civil war is a war between opposing groups of people living in the same country. Both the North and the South are from the same country, the United States, but that makes this a civil war and not just a regular war. It's not a war between two countries. This is a civil war, and it's its own people turning on itself, and that's the citizens, and that's going to also be the people that are in Congress with them. Okay, northern states. Northern states are states from the north. How about that? So you've got Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Kansas, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, New Jersey, California, Oregon, and Michigan. These states were all anti-slavery states. Faux show. The southern states from the south. South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina. Any states that wanted slavery sided with the South. They called themselves the Confederate States of America. And they're super weird. Why? They lost the war. Duh. They're losers. Okay, so border states. This is where things get a little weird, right? We talked about these border states. They separated the North and the South. This is what they called, I've referred to this in my classes, the Mason-Dixon line, which runs right through Tennessee and Kentucky right here. The Mason-Dixon line divided the North and the South, and that signified that these red states right here turned to blue states later because they were kind of forced to, kind of not. They didn't really resist. So they became, these were border states later becoming part of the Union. Had slavery, but didn't really want to break away from the Union to try to preserve the United States. All right. Next thing, martial law. This is where it gets crazy, okay? Basically, martial law is a rule that temporarily suspends citizens' rights. The best way to describe this is about to get wild here. Check this out. So here's a map, right? You've got Mr. Abraham Lincoln right here. So here's what happens. Maryland gets a little unruly, and they decide that they're going, people in Maryland and some Southern sympathizers decided, hey, this is a good idea. Let's destroy railroads and take down telegraph wires. Wrong. Abe Lincoln smacked you in the face with martial law. You're going to lose. And so he does. And so here's what he does. He comes all the way down here and he sends his troops to Maryland to take care of the problem, right? So you got your Southern people destroying railroads, telegraphs, trying to fight the Union without actually having a war. And so here's what they do, right? Here's one of the pictures that you'll see, possibly through your research, where they destroyed some railroad tracks, right? Okay, so there's that. So he comes down there and he temporarily suspends citizens' rights, and they're not allowed to do anything, right? And so here's what he does. He slaps martial law on the whole state of Maryland, saying you don't have any rights temporarily until we get this figured out. And all that meant was, hey, guess what, you guys? Your rights are suspended, and you are not allowed to do anything about it until we see that you are fit. Way to go, Lincoln. Nice work. Take care of those Confederate ding-dongs. All right, so back to martial law, right? Here's one of the proclaimed areas of martial law. We have used martial law in history not that long ago. The Baltimore riots. They temporarily suspended citizens' rights. They can search and seize anything they want. They can hold you in jail without a fair trial. Lots of crazy things. So that's kind of what happened there. Okay, last couple of slides here. The advantages and disadvantages for the North. As you can see right here, some of the advantages. The slaves were running into the northern side. The North increased almost exponentially rate. That means that the slave rate, once the advantages of the North, when people found out that the North were going to allow slaves in their state, they wanted to fight for the Union to gain their freedom. So your graph would look like this, and they exponentially went up and increased because black slaves would go up to the North, right? Disadvantages, some of these. Northern soldiers had to conquer a huge area to bring the South back to the Union. That was crazy. But the Union came down from up here and invaded the South, right? And so the South had the home field advantage, like playing in your home field. They knew the course better, and therefore they could hide. The Union did not, right? So there were lots of other ones. You can go ahead and read those later. I'm not going to explain that. A blockade. One of the last things I'm going to talk about. That means war is on. Let's do this. So war breaks out, right? And the first mark of the war is said to be Fort Sumter. And Lincoln tried to shut that down. They held out Fort Sumter over on the eastern coast of the United States, and they bailed on. They tried to escape, tried to hold out. Lincoln cut their food supply up, and then later said he would give them more food, but they had to surrender. They ended up surrendering. One of the blockades that he did to have a successful winning of the war was to make a the snake plan, the anaconda plan, all the way around and block off all exports. That's what a blockade is. Nothing goes in and nothing goes out of an area you're trying to hold out. So basically, they're soaking up any supplies that the Confederate States tried to get, and that ultimately wins the war for them. Till next time, it's Mr. Grote. Peace out, my social studies kids. Later.